Sudan's war has entered its fourth year with no end in sight. It remains the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Current efforts led by the United States to reach a truce have just not succeeded. They need to be elevated and quickened, and other countries need to do much more to end the fighting. In many areas, the state has all but collapsed. But this war is not just about Sudan. Regional powers are helping fuel the fighting by backing different sides to protect their own interests. But at the same time, it's important to realize the conflict is tearing Sudan apart from within. It has amplified local disputes, just shredding what is left of its social fabric and polarizing most Sudanese. Even if external support stops, these internal divisions could fuel violence in Sudan for years to come. Two belligerents are at the center of this conflict: the Sudanese Armed Forces, the country's army, and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The army and the RSF entered into what was known as a real uneasy partnership, frankly, with civilians after Bashir was toppled in 2019. However, the pair overthrew the transitional government in a coup in 2021 and consolidated power. Disagreements over if the RSF should be absorbed into the army led to fierce clashes in Khartoum in April 2023, and the war quickly enveloped other parts of Sudan. The country is basically split in two right now. The army controls the eastern and central region, including Khartoum and Port Sudan on the Red Sea, which is the country's main port. The army is allied with former rebel groups from Darfur who are bitterly opposed to the RSF, which has committed atrocities in many of their home areas in the west. A number of communal militias and paramilitary forces also make up critical parts of the army's war effort. The RSF controls most of Darfur and some parts of the central Kordofan region, which is the main front line today. The RSF recently made quick inroads into Blue Nile State, along Sudan's porous border with South Sudan and Ethiopia. All the conflicts in Sudan's history have involved external actors. This one is really unprecedented. It's never been to this scale. The UAE remains the RSF's key patron, providing critical financial, military, and logistical support. The UAE denies allegations regarding its support to the RSF. The army is backed by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, Eritrea, and at times Iran has aided their war efforts. The external powers increasingly compete with each other on the Horn of Africa, and the rivalries have just continued to escalate this war. Neither party nor the outside supporters have backed down. Sudan's neighbors, including Chad, Libya, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic, are also involved, primarily through allowing weapons to cross their borders. Most worryingly, there are reports that Ethiopia is supporting the RSF's efforts in Blue Nile. This risks widening the conflict to a regional fight, particularly if Ethiopia's war with Tigray resumes and possibly draws on Eritrea, which is an ally of the army. The Quad, as it's known, is led by the United States and includes Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE. This remains the primary recent effort to push the parties to stop fighting. The United States is focusing its efforts on securing a humanitarian truce that could lead to a permanent ceasefire and hopefully a transitional political process. But this has just been increasingly elusive, and importantly, groups within each side will need to buy into this in order for it to be viable and lasting. Much more pressure to de-escalate. The situation needs to be placed onto the Quad members because many of them wield the most influence over the two belligerents, the army and the RSF. Key to a lot of this and a viable future for the country is that a wider group of multilateral organizations, including the UN, the AU, the EU, the East African Regional Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and the League of Arab States, the Arab League, is also trying to launch a Sudanese-owned political dialogue process. While the US is likely to remain at the helm, there are just real ongoing questions about whether the Trump administration is actually committed to seeing this through. Countries from Europe to the Middle East to the Horn of Africa and the wider African continent need to do more. especially if that American effort doesn't result in a breakthrough soon. Sudan cannot be allowed to slip off the global agenda, even as the US-Israeli war with Iran consumes most global attention. The longer this conflict continues, the greater the risk that it'll solidify the country's partition. It would spread across the region and ruin even more lives than it already has.